Have you ever just stopped and noticed how incredibly stressful and anxious modern life can feel? Especially when you compare it to the quiet, effortless progression of the natural world. Think about a forest growing or a river flowing. There's absolutely no anxiety there, just steady, continuous progress. Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating text written in 2022 by an author named Su Feng that tackles this exact contrast. His core premise is incredibly direct. He argues that basically all human suffering, societal chaos, and personal anxiety stem from one single mistake. And that mistake is violating what he calls the way of nature. Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in and see exactly how the author breaks this philosophy down.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover defining the natural way, the trap of quick success, rethinking the fear of death, the roots of poverty, and finally, health and economic order.
All right, Section 1, Defining the Natural Way, a Biological Baseline. Before we apply this to human society, we need to nail down exactly what the author means by this concept. To illustrate this, the author uses this brilliant extended metaphor. Think about planting a single corn seed in moist soil. It follows an absolutely immutable schedule. In one day, the embryo germinates. By day 7, a small shoot pops out. Fast forward to day 27, and you get new leaves. At day 52, the corn silk and pollen appear, and finally, right around that 100-day mark, the corn is ready for harvest. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that the natural way demands patience. It's a fixed, step-by-step timeline that you literally cannot skip or rearrange. And this rule isn't just for plants either. Take the number 21. Under normal conditions, an egg takes exactly 21 days to hatch into a chicken. It doesn't take 5 days, and it doesn't take 50. It's 21. The author uses this to really hammer home this concept of natural pacing. Basically, every living thing operates on an embedded, unchangeable biological clock. Actually, even physics follows this rule. Without human intervention, everything follows strict natural laws. Take water, for instance. It changes states based entirely on temperature. At 0 degrees, it's solid ice. Nudge it above 0, it's liquid. Hit 100 degrees, and it evaporates right into gas. The author points out that when water flows, a channel naturally forms. When a melon is ripe, it just falls off the vine. Everything in the vast world, outside of us messing with it, evolves according to this incredibly strict, harmonious code. Now, humans are a species of nature too, right? We're bound by these same laws, like aging and dying. But because we have subjective thought and free will, we possess this unique ability, and let's face it, a strong tendency to totally deviate from these rules. According to the text, when we obey the natural way, society is harmonious. But when we disrupt it, that's when we get disaster. Which brings us to a huge pivotal question from the text. How do we actually obey the way of nature in our messy, complex, modern lives? And that leads us right into Section 2, the trap of quick success and instant wealth. This is where the author takes these biological rules and applies them to our modern craving for immediate success. What's really fascinating is how perfectly this maps back to that earlier timeline. On one hand, we have following nature, which is accumulating wealth gradually, day by day, exactly like growing that 100-day corn. On the other hand, we have violating nature, which is seeking sudden, massive wealth. The author argues that wanting to get rich overnight is literally like planting a corn seed on Monday and expecting to eat the harvest by Thursday. It's just a fundamental violation of how the universe operates. And because overnight success is so unnatural, the author claims the fallout is catastrophic. The text notes that 99% of humanity is out there seeking immediate gain, whether that's through gambling, crazy stock speculation, corruption, or just cutting corners. But violating nature like this leads to inflated desires, totally strained relationships, twisted mental states, and ultimately a massive spike in anxiety and fear. Any success you get by rushing, the author warns, just plants hidden dangers that are absolutely going to erupt later on. Moving right along to Section 3, rethinking the fear of death as a natural progression. This shifts our focus to the next major human phenomenon the text digs into, which is our relationship with our own mortality. Here is a pretty wild number for you. The author asserts that 99% of people hold a deep, deep fear of death. But according to this philosophy, that mindset is highly irrational. Why? Because death is the ultimate, most just, natural progression there is. Every single thing in the universe, even the earth and the sky, will eventually face extinction. So humans definitely aren't going to be the exception. So what's the alternative? How should we live knowing this? The text draws a really sharp comparison here. Fearing death makes people timid. It forces them to live a restricted, fearful life. But if you truly understand the mysteries of life and the way of nature, you recognize that death is simply an inevitable trend. And maybe it even opens a door to something more fascinating. Because of that, the author argues the ideal state is to actually embrace death with a smile. Smiling at death allows you to live a relaxed, free, and incredibly romantic life right now. Building on those personal mindsets, let's zoom out to a broader societal issue in Section 4, the roots of poverty, societal observations. The text makes some really interesting sociological connections here, linking economic standing directly back to nature. The author points out that biodiversity in nature is a clear sign of prosperity, and he says the exact same thing applies to human societies. Prosperous systems embrace diversity, immigrants, and new ideas. The text explicitly uses the United States as an example of this, noting that its wealth and strength are tied to its high percentage of immigrants and its acceptance of multiple cultures. Impoverished systems, conversely, are described as closed off, excluding outsiders, and trapped in very conservative, stubborn thinking. Poverty in this framework is just the natural consequence of closing yourself off. This whole idea is beautifully summed up by a proverb cited in the text. The one who steals will not become wealthy, and the one who treats guests well will not be poor. Whether we're talking about a nation welcoming immigrants or just an individual staying open-minded to new concepts, treating guests, both literal people and new ideas, well is the natural path to prosperity. Refusing them is a violation, and that leads directly to decline. And that brings us to our final topic, Section 5, Health and Economic Order and the Consequences of Violating Nature. Here, we're analyzing how breaking these rules manifests physically in our bodies and macroeconomically in our nations. The author states incredibly plainly that disease is a direct sign that you are violating the way of nature. If you aren't rising with the sun and resting when it sets, or if your diet is all over the place, you're breaking the rhythm. But it is not just physical habits. Psychological traits like anger, constantly comparing yourself to others, envy, greed, aggressiveness, selfishness. All of these negative mental states are viewed as direct violations of nature that will inevitably show up as physical illness. In fact, the author is so confident in this framework that he presents what he calls his Goldbach conjecture on health. It's a bold, absolute claim he challenges readers to test. It states, anyone who has a disease must have violated the way of nature, and anyone without a disease must be following the way of nature. It's definitely a striking perspective, right? It leaves zero room for chance and demands that we take absolute 100% responsibility for our alignment with the natural world. Then, the author scales this up from the human body to the entire economy. When we look at nature, species self-regulate perfectly without any human management. Applying this to economics, the text argues that a market economy aligns with nature. It self-regulates, needs less intervention, and generates prosperity. A planned economy, on the other hand, represents artificial human intervention. Just like how humans messing with nature causes floods and droughts, the author posits that government intervention in the economy disrupts the natural course, which leads to poverty and disaster. Finally, after walking us through all of this, seeds, wealth, death, poverty, and economics, the author delivers his ultimate theological conclusion. He states very clearly that this immutable, perfectly balanced natural order isn't just some random accident of the universe. According to the text, the way of nature is, ultimately, the way of the greatest creator. It is a divine framework intentionally laid out for the entire world to follow. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and it leaves us with a pretty critical question to ask ourselves. Based on everything we've just looked at, from the dangers of chasing quick success to the everyday stress of modern living, are you trying to harvest your own corn in just 5 days? Are you rushing your life, your wealth, or your personal growth at the expense of your natural rhythm? It's a really profound thought to take away, and hopefully it encourages all of us to find just a bit more patience and harmony in our own journeys.